Welcome back to What the Health. I am a little nervous for this episode today because I imagine it's going to ruffle a few feathers. And please remember that my beliefs and your beliefs do not have to align in order for us to respect each other. And I preface that because today we are talking about the state of abortion in America. And I want to start off this episode by sharing a story with you about a patient named Sarah Parker. So Sarah had always wanted to be a mother, and at 32, she and her husband Mark were finally expecting their first child, a little girl they had already named Lillian Grace. The moment they saw those two pink lines, they started imagining her future, who she would become, what she would love, how she would change their lives. They painted her nursery in a soft lavender, picked out books they'd read to her at bedtime, and every night, Mark would whisper to Sarah's belly, telling Lillian how much he loved her already. But at 20 weeks, their world collapsed. The ultrasound room was supposed to be filled with joy that day. It was the scan where they'd finally see Lillian's face, where they'd get that perfect little profile picture to tuck into the baby book. But the excitement drained from the room the moment the technician's expression shifted. The cheerful small talk stopped. The clicking slowed. And then she excused herself to get the doctor. When the OB, Dr. Patel, walked in, her face was calm, but her voice was heavy. She sat down beside Sarah, took a breath, and said words that would haunt them forever. "I need to talk to you about your baby's condition." Lillian had anencephaly, a fatal neural tube defect where the skull and brain fail to properly develop. The doctor gently explained that Lillian had no chance of survival outside of the womb. If she made it to term, she would live for minutes, maybe an hour at most. There was no treatment, no cure, just a slow, devastating wait for the inevitable. Sarah gripped Mark's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to believe there was a mistake, a way to fix this, a chance, any chance, that her daughter could survive. Dr. Patel nodded her understanding, her voice soft but firm. "I know this isn't what you were expecting to hear today, but I want to go over your options." There were two choices. One, carry out the pregnancy to term. Sarah would continue to grow, her body preparing for a birth that would end in death. She would endure the swelling, the back pain, the strangers congratulating her, asking her about the nursery, never knowing she was carrying a child who would never come home. And at the end of it all, she would get to have labor, go through hours of excruciating pain, only to say goodbye the moment she said hello. The other option was to induce early and end the pregnancy. It wasn't an easy decision. It would never be easy. But it was a choice that would allow Sarah to avoid months of emotional and physical suffering. It would let her grieve on her own terms. It would spare her from the agony of delivering a baby she knew she'd have to bury. Sarah's hand shook. "If I choose to end the pregnancy, what does that process look like?" Dr. Patel hesitated. She knew what she had to say next. She hated saying it. But she had to. "I need to check the legal restrictions in this state." See, Sarah lived in Texas. And in Texas, abortion after 6 weeks was illegal, even in cases like hers. The law didn't care that Lillian would never survive. It didn't care that Sarah would be forced to carry a pregnancy that would end in heartbreak. The doctors were not legally allowed to help her. Sarah was stunned. "You mean I have to go through with this?" Dr. Patel's face tightened, her voice barely masking her frustration. "We can't provide the procedure, but if you want to consider other options, I can give you resources for out-of-state care." Sarah didn't hear the rest of the conversation. She wasn't just grieving her daughter. She was grieving the loss of control over her own body, her own future. Mark drove them home in silence that day. Sarah stared out the window, watching the world move on as if nothing had happened. But inside her, Everything was falling apart. She spent the next 2 weeks drowning in research. Clinics in nearby states, the cost of travel, the risk. Could she afford the time off work? The airfare, the medical expenses out of pocket? Texas wouldn't help her, and her insurance wouldn't either, because what she needed was now considered illegal. She felt trapped. Her body was not her own anymore. She had to carry Lillian, endure the pain, the comments from strangers, the endless reminders that there would be no happy ending. And when the contractions came, the hospital treated her like any other mother in labor. They coached her through the pain as if this was a moment of joy. But it wasn't. It was a slow, brutal countdown to loss. When Lillian was born, Sarah wrapped her in her arms and watched her take a few shallow breaths, make a tiny sound, and then fall silent. There was no cry, no warmth, just a still, fragile body in her arms, and Sarah had to say goodbye to the daughter she just met. But Sarah's grief didn't end in the hospital. Her body still acted as if she had a newborn to feed. Her breasts swelled, leaked milk, which was a cruel reminder of what was missing. Every hormonal shift sent her deeper into despair. Postpartum depression hit like a tidal wave. But there was no baby to distract her from the pain. She couldn't look at the nursery. She couldn't face the life she had spent months preparing for. She had been forced to carry, to endure, to deliver. But then there was no support in the aftermath. Her marriage suffered. Mark wanted to heal, but Sarah didn't know how. The trauma of being forced into this situation, of losing her baby in the most excruciating way possible, it consumed her. And all she could think about was, why did Texas do this to me? And Sarah's story isn't unique. Across the country, women are being forced to carry non-viable pregnancies. They are suffering because of laws written by politicians, not doctors. And every day, the landscape of abortion rights is shifting, forcing more and more people into situations they should never have to endure. So today we're breaking it all down, the laws, the court cases, the politics, but more importantly, most importantly, the people. The women whose lives are being shaped, controlled, and sometimes destroyed by policies that ignore their reality. This isn't about politics. This is about healthcare, autonomy, and the freedom to make decisions about your own body. Welcome to What the Health. Let's get into it. So, if you're pregnant in America right now, your rights don't depend on your medical needs. They don't even depend on science. They depend on your zip code. One state over, you could have access to safe, legal abortion care. But in another, the exact same medical procedure could land your doctor in prison. Imagine having a miscarriage, but being too scared to go to the ER because you could be accused of self-managing an abortion, which would land you in jail. Imagine carrying a baby you desperately wanted, only to learn it wouldn't survive. But your hospital refuses to help you until you are literally dying. Imagine being 14, being raped by a family member and told, "Too bad, the law says you have to give birth." It sounds dystopian, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. This is America in 2025. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, abortion access in America has become a legal minefield. We now live in a country where your ability to make decisions about your own body depends entirely on the state you live in. And here's the reality. As of today, abortion is completely illegal in 14 states. In these places, there are no exceptions for rape, no exceptions for incest, nothing. If you get pregnant in Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, or any of these other 11 states, the law says you are having that baby, period. And before anyone says anything, well, what about medical emergencies? Well, let's talk about that. Because the law in these states are so vague that doctors are terrified to act. We've already seen cases of women going into septic shock because hospitals waited too long to intervene. Why? Because the law says you cannot perform an abortion unless the patient is, and listen carefully, unless the patient is actively dying. So what does that mean exactly? Does a doctor risk a felony charge and the loss of their license if they act too soon? How close to death does a woman have to be before it's legal to save her? Nobody knows. And that's the fucking problem. In some states, abortion is legal, but only barely. We're talking about 6-week bans, mandatory waiting periods, and laws designed to make it as difficult as possible to access care. In Georgia, Florida as of May 2024, Ohio, South Carolina, Arizona, Iowa, Utah, and Wyoming. That's the law there. And let's talk about those 6-week bans for a second, because on paper, some people might think 6 weeks, that's plenty of time to know you're pregnant. But in reality, most people don't even know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And here's why. Pregnancy isn't dated from conception. It's dated from the first day of your last period. So if you're one of the lucky ones who have an irregular cycle, or if you're like me and you don't track your periods down to the minute, you might not even realize you've missed one before that 6-week cutoff. By the time you take a pregnancy test, it's too late. The state has already decided for you. Then we have the states where abortion is still legal, but with strings attached. These places allow abortion, but they have put up as many roadblocks as possible. Waiting periods, mandatory counseling, bans on insurance coverage, gestational limits, and in some cases, laws that force doctors to read state-scripted anti-abortion propaganda before performing a procedure. And let's be real. These laws aren't about informed consent. They're about making people jump through hoops until they run out of time. And finally, we have the states where abortion is still fully legal, and thank God for these 14. And in some cases, abortion is actively protected. These states have passed laws to ensure abortion remains accessible, even for people traveling from out of state. Some have even become safe haven states, meaning that they refuse to cooperate with investigations from states that have banned abortion. But here's the catch. Even though abortion is legal in these places, demand has skyrocketed. Clinics are overwhelmed. Wait times are weeks, sometimes months long. And for patients traveling from out of state, the cost of flights, gas, childcare, hotel stays, and lost wages make abortion inaccessible, even when it's technically legal. So let's put this all together. If you're pregnant in Texas, you're expected to either carry to term or travel thousands of miles to get care. If you're in Georgia, you better know that you're pregnant the moment it happens, because after 6 weeks, it's now illegal. If you're in New York, you have access, but only if you can afford the cost of care and travel. Does this sound like a healthcare system to you, or does it sound like fucking chaos? This is why we can't talk about abortion as just a political debate. Because while politicians argue in Washington, real people are suffering. And in some cases, those people are dying. So what happens next? Is there any hope for federal protections? Or are we just moving toward a future where abortion is outlawed nationwide? The courts are making big moves, and trust me, you'll want to hear what's at stake. On the next episode of What the Hell, Part 2, we're going to talk about the legal battles ahead. We'll discuss the medication mifepristone, which is the pill at the center of Supreme Court case. We're going to talk about how mifepristone works, why people are trying to get it banned, and as well as some lawsuits that we're going to talk about where 5 women are actually fighting back against their own state. And then we will address the fight in Congress, the national ban versus national protection. We'll also discuss the human impact. real lives and real consequences, how the abortion ban is actually affecting women. It's also going to get a little touchy because we are going to talk about when religion and reproductive rights collide, the conflict between faith and abortion. And I know this is a sensitive topic, and I assure you, I am going to be as respectful as I possibly can as we discuss this topic. And then we'll talk about the future of abortion access. Where do we go from here? How do we navigate this healthcare system? So if you'd like, please stick around. We're probably going to do parts 2 and 3 later this week for you guys to listen to. If you've liked this, please subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always choose kindness.